Jose Altuve has a fractured thumb. Let's discuss on Fantasy Baseball today in 5. Welcome into FBT in 5. Today is Monday, March 20th. I am Frank Samfeld, joined by Scott White. And let's get into it. Thanks for nothing, Daniel Bard, because he was the pitcher who hit Jose Altuve with a pitch on his right hand Saturday during the WBC. Altuve now has a fractured right thumb, will undergo surgery, and I've seen timelines, Scott, that range from 6 weeks on the optimistic end to 10 weeks on the not so optimistic end. What are your thoughts on a potential timetable and how far you've lowered Jose Altuve in your rankings?
Yeah, so the closest thing to a timetable we've received is from national reporter Bob Nightingale, who said 8 to 10 weeks. The Astros aren't offering an official timetable until Altuve's out of surgery, which is a little concerning that they don't. I don't think we know what the extent of the surgery is. But I did see another Astros beat writer for The Athletic said they're hoping to. The hope is they can get him back at some point in Houston, which would be closer to like 6 to 8 weeks. So I'm thinking that 8 to 10 week timetable that Bob Nightingale offered is on the more pessimistic end of how things could go. And even if we use that 8 to 10 weeks, well, 8 would be mid-May, which would put Altuve missing about a quarter of the season. 10 would be start of June, which would be more like a third of the season, which is not nothing, but I don't think it's reason to completely bury Jose Altuve in the rankings still. I moved him down from first in my second base rankings to sixth, both in 5x5 scoring and point scoring. In 5x5 scoring specifically, that puts Altuve between Andres Gimenez and Max Muncy, and it makes him still one of my top 100 overall players. Easier to justify, of course, the shallower the league is, and definitely easier to justify if you have an IL spot to play with, which, I think most fantasy leagues offer an IL spot, so you're not losing a bench spot, keeping Altuve stashed away all year. I think it makes perfect sense to draft him within those top 100 picks. And I think what helps the case, I was saying I moved Altuve out of the top spot in my second base rankings. I think he's the best at the position, but second base is a position that has a lot of interesting talent available later on. I mean, Ketel Marte, who's been in the number one at second base conversation twice in the past 4 years, he's going outside the top 200 now. I really like Michael Massey. I've talked him up a few times. Royal second baseman, had a good spring. He's not even being drafted in the majority of leagues. So if there is a position where you have to find a fill-in, second base is probably the best one. And like I said, that makes it easier to draft Altuve with the intention of stashing him for the first quarter to 1/3 of the year.
And another second baseman who's pretty boring, goes very late in drafts, Gene Segura. He's a name I bring up a lot, where if you need a replacement in a shallower league or you're doing a draft, I think you can pick him up very late in your drafts as well. There were 9 drafts done over at the NFBC on Sunday. The ADP for Altuve in those drafts was 133.46. Worth mentioning, the NFBC doesn't have any IL spots, so maybe that's why he went a little bit lower. Yeah. But each of Scott, Chris, and myself have Altuve just inside the top 100. So I think that might be more representative of where we see him go in other leagues.
I mean, NFBC, it kind of triple penalizes injuries because it doesn't offer, well, first of all, you're losing the player. That's one penalty. That's true of every league. Doesn't offer an IL spot, so you're losing a bench spot as well. That's the second penalty. And third penalty, there are no trades in NFBC, so you can't trade your way out of an injury. So that makes it a lot scarier to draft and stash someone like Altuve. But if that has kind of, if those ADP levels and the commentary surrounding them kind of have an outsized effect on how everyone behaves around Altuve, then he could be a huge value in fantasy based on this. And I kind of anticipate myself drafting even more of Altuve because of this injury. Before, I liked grabbing him in round 3, but he was kind of getting pushed into round 2 and he was getting harder and harder to get. So now, obviously, he's easier to get. And in that way, there's a bit of a silver lining.
Who is filling in for Jose Altuve? According to Roster Resource, David Hensley is somebody that could be the second baseman for the Astros. Last year in the minors, hit 298 with a 420 OBP, 10 home runs, and 20 steals. He's got any interest in very deep leagues in David Hensley?
I mean, I don't know that it has to be very deep. If it's like a 15-team roto league, like an NFBC contest, I think there's some interest in taking a late round flyer on him. He was old for the minor leagues last year, but put up good numbers: 298, 10 home runs, 20 steals in 104 games. Great on base skills, reached a 420 clip, and some of the exit velocity readings are pretty impressive. I know I saw a clip of him hitting a ball 114 miles per hour. High-end exit velocity speaks really to a player's power potential, and it seems like David Hensley has some. So, yeah, and in those deeper roto leagues, I'd have some interest in him for sure.
All right. For more extensive fantasy baseball coverage, listen to the Fantasy Baseball Today podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the Audacy app, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Thanks for listening to Fantasy Baseball Today in 5, and we'll be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.